I totally agree with that. I think that people in 2024, particularly, we talk a lot on the show about next generation of folks too, people in their 50s, 40s, 30s, and certainly 20s, and how they want to interact more with people than brands, right? But at the same time, I struggle with it a little bit, Paige, because I think we're in the scenario that you just said. My personal LinkedIn page, it has more followers than our company.
Yeah.
And I struggle if I'm a SEPA sitting here trying to put on my advisor hat. I would say that, well, it sounds like it's more about Scott than it is about EPI. Hey everybody, and welcome back to the Exit Is Now podcast with me, your host, Scott Snider, on another Flip the Script episode. So there's been really cool episodes that we've been doing throughout the year where every 4 or 5 shows we flip it over to a guest that interviews me. And so we have a guest here today that's very important to me, very important to our people here at EPI, and somebody that you've seen on the show, I think, now for the 3rd time. So it seems like you're very natural at this now. Usually she's producing the show behind the screen. But welcome, Paige, our Director of Marketing here at EPI.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Thanks for coming back. I can remember quite of an evolution now. She's like you're like a regular show host now. You came in here the first time like, man, this is super awkward, but now you're like powerhouse.
Nothing can be more awkward, I would say, than getting up on stage at the summit and talking in front of people. So this is much better.
Yeah, if you did not catch it, it was I would think, actually, in all seriousness, kind of like a milestone moment in your career where you were able to get up and introduce one of our keynote speakers in front of like 750 people, but put your swing on. And I think really cool because Paige represents at EPI the next generation of leaders here at our company. I think throughout the year we've talked about decentralization, the exit strategy and plan of me and Chris, but they're kind of a part of it. And so, but thanks for coming back.
Well, thanks. I'm excited to be here.
So I'm going to flip it over to you. So it's your show. Fire away.
Perfect. So I kind of wanted to talk about and start off the show with a little bit about my journey here at EPI and how you've really influenced my basically whole career so far, and talk about kind of how that plays into our growth at EPI. So my first question for you would be, how does mentoring individuals like myself, who I started as an intern at EPI, help develop future leaders within EPI, and how has it contributed to our growth and readiness for exit?
Yeah, so big loaded question here. So let's start to unpack this one. So I would say for many of the executives that are perhaps listening, business leaders or business owners, Paige is almost like your ideal situation, right? Because what's nice in terms of mentorship is that, first, she has no influences, right? Is that if you know Paige's story, she came here as a college intern, then was my first virtual employee ever. So she said way before virtual employees were cool, right? You said, look, I want to continue to work, but I have to go back to college. So can I work virtually and then come back once in a while and check in? Then she was hired in after college as a marketing coordinator, moved to marketing manager, and now is our director of marketing. And I always say, certainly sits on our executive team, but quite literally, if you're looking to influence me, you should probably influence her first because she's one of my and my father's most trusted advisors today. But in terms of mentorship, it was kind of really cool because you kind of learn the value acceleration way of doing things. You're kind of like me, and maybe that's why we work well together in some sense, is that I don't know any other way to run a company rather than through the value acceleration methodology. So I think in terms of mentorship and our relationship and your impact here at EPI, it's kind of a cool scenario because you didn't have to like rip down all this other stuff that you learned throughout a career and kind of rebuild it in a different way. So I would say certainly certainly a critical element for long-term success and readiness because you're a value creation person, whether you know it or not.
Totally. I would agree with that. I think starting here as an intern, even before I was lucky enough before my senior year to start here, kind of learn a little bit about the methodology, and then take that even into like my senior year with like my capstone project and all of that stuff. I had just already had a very different approach.
Yeah.
And so during my senior year, I started thinking about marketing in terms of value on a business as opposed to just,
100%.
maybe superficial marketing tactics and things like that. So no, I think that was really great. What about you? Can you speak to maybe your mentors who have influenced your career and maybe talk about how now you approach mentorship within EPI?
Yeah, it was funny. We were just talking about this the other day, Paige. It's like, I actually don't feel I am like all that great of a coach, right? And I say that because I think it's the entrepreneur in me. Though I've had some wildly impactful mentors, my mentors as well have said, here's the framework.
Yeah.
Go out and do it. But I've been also mentored by or influenced by some other kind of wild entrepreneurs. So maybe that's the first thing, right, is that I've kind of adopted their style along the way. But there are two, when you just kind of randomly ask me that question, that come to mind first. So obviously my dad. At 10 years old taught me how to be an entrepreneur. He would travel a lot for work. He would come home and need his shoes polished. So I'd polish his shoes for like something that was something funny, right, like $5. Then I would only get about $2.50 of that because some of it goes to taxes and some of it goes to savings. But he's obviously had a huge impact on my life from the first time I can remember polishing a shoe to now nearly 40 years old running a what I would think of is a more significant company. And I would say a gentleman named Tom Emmett. So Tom Emmett passed away several years ago, but Tom owned a landscape equipment store in Richfield, Ohio. And for any Clevelander or Ohio person listening in, Richfield, his shop was right next to the old Coliseum right there where we used to have all of our sporting and entertainment events. But Tom was a guy that smoked an old pipe. Every time I would go in to get a lawnmower fixed or a piece of equipment or something, he would invite me into his office and sit down. He would smoke that pipe, and eventually when he thought I was serious about growing a landscape management company, he slid across a book that influenced him, which was quite literally not a book. It was a spiral-bound like article that he had written. So, but Tom really taught me how to work with people and how to manage a profit and loss statement and things of that nature. But I would say like Tom Emmett and Chris Snider are two obviously impactful mentors along my journey as well.
Do you think you take any of their tactics or any lessons from them and use them here at EPI, or even how you coach myself and the rest of the leadership team?
I think that so if you took those two gentlemen, for example, you could definitely see. I think that the very visible ones are from my dad, right? Like we run the methodology here. We do 90-day sprints. We do a version of quarterly renewals. We do a version of Dad's performance review.
Yeah.
And then you could maybe see my stricter lines from Dad sometimes in business. Tom Emmett was a little bit more of like an experienced guy. So like our version of one-on-ones, where it's kind of like he was basically doing a one-on-one every other month. I came into his shop to fix my lawnmower or get a part. He would light up a pipe, and we would sit there and go through that book together. Mm-hmm. And I'd like to think like when we sit down for a one-on-one, it's not necessarily like these tactical X's and O's, X's and O's. It's really more strategic, or talking about a pain point or a struggle that we might be having and how we can fix it. I'd much rather sit in your comfy chair in your office and knock down a couple of coffees along the way and have a conversation about life and business. And that's what me and Tom did. So maybe subconsciously I've brought that into my mentorship style.
Definitely. I think that's something that I've even taken to my team too, is like the one-on-ones aren't necessarily always tactical even, or like I think we call it like blocking and tackling a lot of times, like solving issues. It's a lot of just like life and business as well. And I think that's really helpful in like building rapport with the team and just making sure it's not just about business, it's also personal.
Yeah, so absolutely.
We are a relatively young team. We had Mackenzie, who was our intern this summer. I was our last one before that. So how, and I guess just our team is young in general, but how do you think mentorship impacts them within their careers or growth? And do you think it ties people in, a little further, ties people in more to EPI as a whole?
I think it's like an impact moment, right? Their experiences. You'll see that at the summit, right? We say experiences, people, and innovation. And I like that slogan, if you will, for the summit because it speaks to who we are as EPI internally, but who the community is as a whole. And I'd like to think a little unique to us that when people come into EPI, a part of having an experience, being involved with great people and getting innovative and creative is having great influences and mentors along the way. I think that the Mackenzie situation, who is our intern, some of you might have gotten a phone call from her to gather some data. I think she's making quite literally like 200 phone calls a week or maybe even more than that. I'd like to think that once exposed to our culture and perhaps mentored a little bit, that we can use it as a recruiting program. I mean, again, last intern that we had was you, and that worked out pretty well. So I would say, how can we replicate that with more interns, frankly, like you, that are looking to gain feedback, grow and evolve, and be a part of a high-impact team? But I also think mentorship is in a young team like ours is likely mandatory.
Yeah.
Is that I think the average age of the leadership team is like 31 or 32 years old. And really, me and Jesse, our director of business development, are really dragging that up, I guess, or pulling that up. And so as perhaps the two old guys on the team. So I think that if you are a younger company, maybe like ours listening, you have to be able to develop mentorship programs formally or informally with your team, because we just don't know what we don't know, and likely we're learning from experiences along the way. So if you almost have like a groupthink session where all of us who are kind of entrepreneurial in sense and learning as we grow can start sharing ideas along the way, but you have to have a core value of ours is purposeful growth. You have to have a purposeful growth mentality, but you also have to be willing to accept feedback along the way because we're quite literally always learning and growing.
Definitely. I was just about to ask that. So since we are so young, I feel we don't have necessarily the experience, but we do have, I would say, the grit and the perseverance, the want to grow. So on that note, how do you think it impacts the innovation that we have at EPI? Because a lot of it doesn't necessarily come from experience. It comes from things that we've learned through our professional development. So how do you think it impacts our innovation?
Yeah, I think that the innovation, the creativity that we have here, given that we're not necessarily influenced by all these outside things because we're so young and maybe hungry in our careers, I think it's like flourishing at EPI. But at the same time, I think it could be a hiccup or a hindrance along the way because we're quite literally trial and error. Now, again, to your point, we have a very intentional professional development program. We very intentionally read and listen to shows like this and podcasts. We very intentionally have performance reviews. We very intentionally have mentors. But that's just knowledge dumped in. You still have to go apply it. So I think we're better off than just kind of winging it. Like maybe when we first came here, we were kind of just like wildly entrepreneurial, like, I think this sounds good. I think we're a little bit better than that, but nonetheless, you also have, and if, again, business owner listening in, you almost have to develop a budget that's a part of your operating expenses that is this trial and error R&D type thing where you know you're going to fail and it's going to cost you money.
Yeah.
But on the flip side, you're going to get young, motivated, wildly creative people that like running and kind of running fast. And so it's just like becomes like a really fun, talk about experiences, people, innovation, kind of a really fun atmosphere. But an atmosphere that definitely has potholes and hurdles along the way, right?
Definitely.
And that will definitely cost you money.
Yeah, definitely. I think we have great advisors as well. Like
That's true.
Chris is always there to lean on to, which is really helpful. I also think our community is really helpful.
Yeah.
We have a very robust community of people who want to help and give feedback, and they're always there for us to lean on. So I think although we don't have the experience, we have a huge community of people who do and want to help us succeed.
And I think most do. Like ours is kind of naturally built in because we represent a bunch of advisors that advise business owners and executives just like us, right? So it's kind of a cool thing. Like we help teach our advisors, but at the same time, given our advisors individual expertise, they also come and advise and mentor us. But yeah, I think when you said that, it kind of hit me. We do kind of have a built-in, but we're also accepting of the feedback, right? So it just kind of goes both ways. Like if you have great advisors, but you can't accept their feedback, then that's kind of a tough day. You're never going to really evolve. Definitely. But if you have a bunch of executives that won't tap into their advisors, that won't evolve. So it is a kind of a two-way street. But yeah, I think that we do have a great built-in, more veteran, if you will, folks that kind of ground us at times.
Yeah, I was talking about it the other day, and I was describing it almost as like a bowling lane. Like we are the bowling ball, but we have the bumpers up of the people who are there, like our community and our advisors, to make sure that we don't veer off, where we don't
veer off too far. I think what I think is actually cool when you mention that, though, is that we do have the bumpers, but maybe the bumpers are a little wider, because I do think, or at least in my journey at EPI specifically, like I do turn to my mentors sometimes and go like, dude, like, couldn't you be the bumper here? Like, why'd you let me go that far into the forest, you know? And they go, because you're the kind of guy that needs that experience so that you can learn and grow from it. Now are you ready to listen more, right? And so we do have the bumpers, but I think it's a good thing that our advisors also kind of let us wander a little bit and then come back. Yeah. Because it helps. It's the way we learn and grow, I think. Yeah, I think that's definitely something you've taken into how you mentor, at least me. Yeah. Sometimes I'll get into a bit of a pickle with a project, and I'm like, why would you let me get this far off? And you're like, well, you had to learn. And it's been helpful. So that is a direct, going back to your kind of top of the show question. That is like a direct example of my my hindrance in coaching. Is like, that's got to be tough sometimes, though, where it's like, dude, why didn't you help me out here? Like, you knew, so you're admittedly saying you knew I was running off course, but you let me run off course for a little bit. That's a little bit frustrating sometimes, but to me, it's the way in which we learn and grow. Definitely. And totally the way, like, my dad would have let me, like, hey, well, now are you ready to come back to the table and look at this again? Exactly. And you've had those experiences along the way. But I just, not to go down a rabbit hole with you, though, the mentorship thing is actually kind of a cool subject here, particularly as we run our companies. But because you're so involved in value acceleration, you don't know other ways. So I'd like to think we do more positive and impactful and good things in our company than we do bad ones. I think it's one of the reasons why we attract and retain great people and have the great weight in the ability to grow in which we have. So you don't have a lot of losses, per se. And what is bad about that sometimes is that we learn from losses. Yeah. And so I think if you're in an organization like ours, you got to kind of let your younger folks wander a little bit, because that's where they're going to get these like mini losses, so they can kind of come back and win the whole battle, if you will, right? So just an interesting concept, I think. My closing question on this topic was going to be, what is your advice to people or owners in a similar situation, or ones that haven't yet taken a chance on younger employees or leadership team members? So I think you kind of just covered that of like, or is there anything you want to add? No, I mean, I guess to maybe sum up our 20 or so minutes on this topic was that, to me, it's going to be a lot easier for the business owner if they budget for it. And so just like you would have to budget to create value in your company, just like you would have to budget to create a new product or a new marketing initiative, or budget your payroll, if you're going to invest in a young team of entrepreneurial minded folks, you know that there's going to be runs that cost you money. And if you built it in, it wouldn't hurt as bad when it happens, right? It wouldn't actually affect the bottom line, because it would already just be a part of who you are. And if they didn't make any mistakes, you just frankly make more money. Yeah. So I do zone in on that. And I would say what I say all the time to owners is that what we're actually all talking about here in the name of like mentorship game is leads towards decentralization of the business owner. Because I just think that's hard. So if you think like, hey, I listen to Scott and Paige and I want to just try this in my company, you're just going to fail because you haven't set your mind right. So I would invest in reading, listening to podcasts, maybe attending a course or two that we have here at EPI to just get your mind right first. Because, again, it's going to be a lot easier to accept some of the turns, the positives, the negatives along the way if you're kind of prepared for it. But I would say it's a huge change to say invest in the next generation and let them run. Yeah. So I would say those two things. So with that, let's take a quick break. Perfect. So stick with us, folks. We'll be right back just after this quick break. Thanks.
Are you a business owner seeking to unlock the true potential of your enterprise? Look no further than the second edition of Christopher Snider's revolutionary book, Walking to Destiny: 11 Actions an Owner Must Take to Rapidly Grow Value and Unlock Wealth. In this updated edition, Snider presents proven strategies for maximizing your company's value and accelerating growth. Whether you're aiming to sell or simply want to ensure long-term success, this book offers a blueprint for building a thriving, self-sustaining business. Walking to Destiny isn't just another book, it's a game changer, backed by Snider's own experience as a successful business owner and as a CPA. This book bridges the gap between business owners and advisors, guiding you towards financial freedom. But don't just take our word for it. Hear from those whose lives have been transformed by its insights. One satisfied reader raves, "The best guide for transitioning out of privately owned companies. I recommend it to all business owners and advisors." Another praises it on its focus for maximizing business value, calling it their, quote, principal tool for educating owners. Ready to take control of your business's destiny? Visit walkingtodestiny.com now and use code EXITISNOW to claim your free copy of Walking to Destiny: 11 Actions an Owner Must Take to Rapidly Grow Value and Unlock Wealth. Don't wait for the perfect moment. Make the moment perfect by seizing this opportunity today.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Exit Is Now podcast. Hanging out with Paige, our Director of Marketing here at EPI, in another Flip the Script episode. So what other questions do you have for me? Let's keep going down the line. This is fun.
Can you talk about your initial vision for EPI's brand and maybe the community that you wanted to build, and how has that evolved over the years?
So, yeah, I think the marketing question is always kind of interesting, right? Because what we had started with was more business development than it was marketing. So it's kind of an interesting question for me, and because I don't know if I had like a true vision that we have today. Like, you have a brand guide, we ping each other for where we're going and what we want to be. But I would say maybe informally, and particularly once we kind of got into EPI, it changed, right? I wanted to keep what I'd like to think we still are is like a sophisticated professional organization that allows advisors to come in and build and grow the relationship with business owners. But at the same time, I didn't want it to be this kind of like old and stuffy organization that talks about your typical professional stuff and stays kind of in their lane, and it's very formal and very continuing education. So we kind of had to blend together, which I think we've achieved now with you and your team. But back then, I wanted to try to blend together this fun place where we kind of learn and grow with this sophisticated place that is still formalized education. And it was always kind of bashing your heads together because like one wasn't really the other. But I never wanted to be like super collegiate, right? Because I didn't like go to college, and I always thought that was super boring. I wanted it to be more about like personal and professional growth and connectivity to the business owner. But I would say that was now back then our marketing stuff certainly didn't tell that story. I mean, it might have said sophisticated maybe, but certainly not like the fun and innovative side that you see today in the EPI world.
Definitely. I think our brand has really evolved over the years as we've gotten kind of a deeper understanding of marketing beyond just, shaking hands and collecting business cards, which is all fine and well, but it's more about the feeling that we want people to have when they interact with us. And then beyond that, all the elements that actually make someone feel that. I think that's been, that mindset shift, I think, has been, at least in my opinion, our biggest evolution of marketing is more than just like a collateral piece. It's like a feeling that we want people
and really
to have.
Across all platforms, right? I mean, I would say like some of the workshops that we have, right, that we all probably run with our customers and clients is, you put up all the big, white the flip charts all over the wall. And I think we've had a couple of these sessions, right, where it's like, well, who do we want to be? And then how do we make that feeling come alive across all platforms? So I'd like to think today, whether you're reading a blog post or coming to the summit or sitting in your first SEPA program or looking at a LinkedIn post, there's a consistency in who we are and the feeling that you get at EPI, and that's marketing, right? That's what you've created.
Definitely. So on that note, I think in the State of Owner Readiness, I don't remember which one it started with, but I think it sparked a conversation with us about how marketing and branding actually can impact the overall exit planning process. really relates to the attractiveness overall of the business. So can you kind of just talk about that?
Yeah, I think that it's certainly like a huge positioner. So I think it was the 2022 Colorado State of
Yes.
Owner Readiness Survey where we had a partner in the state that was helping us put together the research who wasn't your traditional advisor, right? Wasn't a CPA, wasn't a financial advisor. He had a marketing agency. And he was talking to us about the impact of marketing, particularly in this world, our more digital world, on the brand of your business. So I would say there's maybe twofold. One, you have attractiveness and readiness, right? So from an attractiveness side, your business is going to look more attractive because you have such a good brand out in the marketplace, right? So attractiveness, for those that don't understand attractiveness and readiness, are your market factors. So if you can position us, we might be a really crappy business when you start peeling the layer of the onion back.
Yeah.
But from an attractiveness standpoint, you're like, dude, that's got to be the biggest brand, the best brand, the most sophisticated brand, and the most and the one that's most inviting. So I think huge impact from attractiveness. But now, if you could peel the layer of the onion back, I think it actually truly contributes to the readiness factors across all 4 C's that we have, right?
Absolutely.
It impacts culture, it impacts people, it impacts customers, and it certainly impacts systems and processes. So that was a kind of a good catalyst to, maybe drive home some of the stuff that we were always thinking.
Yeah.
But I think since 2022, make it over the last 2 years a lot more intentional in what you do. Like you guys create standard operating procedures like by the dozens each year. So super impactful to both readiness and attractiveness long term.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that was a big learning moment for me was when I had to talk to you about how important it is to document our brand. I remember like one of the first things that we kind of disagreed on when I became our marketing manager was I wanted to do a project for our brand guidelines. Up to that point, we had no documentation for the colors we used. There were no specs for our logos. It was all just whatever we wanted that day. It was just blue. So
I love blue.
I know, which is great, but we have to document which one we use because that's the brand. It sticks with me because it was one of the first things that I really had to like fight for as our marketing manager of like how important it is to document the brand and then putting it in terms that you like of the language that you speak and how it impacts our actual value. Like having our brand documented is very important when it comes to, those.
Well, the value of the company.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I think you're spot on, even thinking about it like quite literally live with you right now. Like you guys have that big brand book now. And so if I'm a buyer, and it'd be interesting for the advisors listening to our show now to see if you guys agree with this, is that if I'm a buyer and I could come into, like we always talk about, could somebody pick it up and run with it without the owner there? Well, yeah, it's all documented right here. So whether it's if our director of marketing leaves, the next director could just pick this up. Here it is, right? So it's certainly repeatable and certainly scalable. But I'm also thinking about when you start to build other products or things that affect your company and you have to use outside vendors to help build that, they need to know that what your brand is. So like think about the Walking to Destiny book. Like there's a book designer, there's supplemental graphic designers that we use. They have to understand the brand and the guidelines. When we're creating new products and services, that has to be all within brand and guidelines. So to your point, pretty impactful to overall value, pretty impactful to the overall value of the company, both short-term gain and then long-term value. So it was something that you had to follow. Because it's not, again, going back to budget, I guess maybe was one of the themes here. If you want to have a really good company like this, you got to budget for it too.
Yeah.
I think it was really hard for me to say, Scott, I want to spend like thousands of dollars on documenting our brand, even being an exit planning guy. I was like, man, that sounds like a lot. Because that's almost like the business of doing marketing, right? Like you call it like maintaining the shop or whatever, right?
Yeah.
It's the business of marketing. So that's not necessarily directly going to land me more business.
No.
But it's a risk factor. In case somebody leaves, we can pick it back up, repeat, and scale.
Yeah.
And when we're working outside, we're not wasting time because everybody understands who we are and what our brand is.
Exactly.
So, yeah, it's a lot big of a deal than I think owners actually really think about.
It was more foundational than, I think directly. It's not a piece that's going to go out and, influence people to
it's like the
purchase
business
or
of
anything
doing
like
marketing.
that.
You got to have it to be successful.
I think you just kind of talked about this a little bit, but what steps do you think business owners can take to enhance their brand before selling, or what would the first step be? I guess kind of talk about your mindset shift and what they should.
Yeah, sure. So, yeah, another great question. So, Again, influenced by our time during the pandemic, we had to move from like, hey, a handshake at a conference to, okay, what's our digital presence? And going back to maybe your earlier conversations about mentorship and being open to feedback, we said, look, we need to bring in an outside consultant to critique and educate, critique what we currently have, and then educate us on what we should have along the way. So if you're sitting here thinking like, hey, that brand book thing, I don't have that, because I certainly didn't have that. Like that maybe is actually, I get what you're saying, at very minimum from a risk factor. We should have something like that. So where do I start? It's going to be similar to in my opinion, it's going to be similar to your value acceleration methodologies triggering event engagement, right? To understand where we are at generally in business across the board. And then from a business, personal, financial side, we need to do a triggering event engagement that allows us to understand all of these factors. Similarly, you need to do that with your marketing. So I think everything starts with a pause point and an assessment of our current environment. And then from there, you could start building budgets, you could start refocusing roles, you could start building systems, and start building out and executing on the strategy that actually goes back and starts making you more money along the way. So I think the first point in that journey is assessing what you currently have. That'll give you the systems, the strategy, and the people, and an analysis of that to move forward. Is that fair to say?
No, absolutely. I agree with you. Kind of shifting a little bit, what role has content marketing, such as like our webinars, white papers, even this podcast, played in enhancing our brand, just in your opinion?
So I think I'm going to try to get technical and use some of your marketing language, and
Perfect.
I'm probably like wildly wrong. But so along the way, you might have to you'll have to either cut what we're hearing today or leave it, and it'll be funny for our audience. So I think all the stuff that you just talked about, right? Whether it's the podcast, the webinars, the white papers, are both things that could fill the top of the funnel, if you will, as well as educate people through the funnel, right? And so I think that as you sit inside of 2024 and beyond, people are content hungry. Yeah. So I think when I talk about marketing with some of our folks, they go, Scott, well, of course you need to do marketing. Your audience is national, frankly international, and you're trying to attract people into a digital marketing funnel to spit them out to become CEPAs, to come to the summit, to buy academy courses, so on and so forth. I own a plastic bottle manufacturer. Like, I don't need to do marketing. And I just totally disagree with that in terms of the role content plays. Yeah. Because people are looking for, if you're making plastic, how's it recyclable? How can we reuse it? And if you can attract them by using content that talks about that, they might say, "Oh, I actually might buy your plastic bottle." And I just think people are like yearning for more growth and in their life, and so they read, they listen, they download, and I think content plays a huge, impactful role in that. So I don't care if you're manufacturing plastic bottles or selling communities and professional education. I think the role of marketing is huge, and then the content within it, people are hungry for it, so it's got to be there. Everybody's looking for that subject matter expert, that thought leader along the way. Yeah,
I think beyond that as well, I think you kind of talked about this a little bit, but studies that have come out post-COVID have shown that we've gotten more personal in business.
No doubt.
So people want to work with people, right? People want to interact with a human. They don't want to interact with a brand. So that's something we were just talking about, of why a lot of brand owners or like the faces of brands have more followers on pages than their actual brand itself. People want to interact with people, and that content can really help you humanize your brand a little bit. So no, I would totally agree with you.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think that's the biggest step we've taken too, is humanizing ourselves a little bit more and not being, I think we always call it stuffy.
So I totally agree with that. I think that people in 2024, particularly, we talk a lot on the show about next generation of folks too, people in their 50s, 40s, 30s, and certainly 20s, and how they want to interact more with people than brands, right? But at the same time, I struggle with it a little bit, Paige, because I think we're in the scenario that you just said. My personal LinkedIn page, it has more followers than our company. Yeah. And I struggle if I'm a CEPA sitting here trying to put on my advisor hat.
I know exactly.
I would say that, well, it sounds like it's more about Scott than it is about EPI, right? So it's like I have 15 followers and they have 15,000 followers. They have 10,000. That seems more centralized around the owner than it is decentralized. So I think for The challenge for companies and marketers like you guys and your team is to how to have like almost multiple influencers and thought leaders in the community, right? So sure, maybe Scott has more than EPI, but so does Paige, and so does Sean, and so does Justin, and so does Julie and Amy, and all of these key players within the EPI community. I think it's interesting to think about longer term.
Yeah, I think going back to what we even talked about more in the the mentorship kind of segment of this podcast, of we have a really great community of thought leaders, of subject matter experts, and people who are helping to spread the awareness of Exit Planning Institute and exit planning as a whole. So it is not centralized on you or Chris or even our leadership team. It's a movement. It's not a person.
No, I totally get it. I'm coming from the buyer's perspective too. Maybe another zinger towards you too is I think the challenge that folks like you face and maybe buyers of companies face, and not necessarily the big sophisticated buyers, right? But like maybe financial buyers like me and Chris were. They're not as sophisticated as you are in marketing, right? I think many owners that I interact with daily, even in our more authentic world, personal world, really truly like almost it's like you have to do marketing. It's just what you have to do. So let's just throw some money at it and get it done. Where they don't think about it as a return on investment as much as it is like a brand holder and like a general awareness thing. So I just think that. What's hard is that when you have the buyer coming in, they're not seeing it as decentralized or centralized, or they're not looking at it as decentralized. They're still saying, well, the owner's Scott, and Scott has the most following, but I understand all these other people. I just think almost like a SEPA, the education hurdle for you in marketing has to be huge for other executives and owners because it's just so complex that I don't know if people understand it.
Yeah, I would agree. I think something I've learned when I interact with you or Chris or just even our advisors when I'm answering questions is putting it in terms that I don't want to say you understand, but it's
you have to speak our language, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Totally.
So when I talk to you about, like, I'll go back to the brand project, I put it in terms of value on the business and structural capital instead of talking about all the collateral we're going to be able to build with it, or like I put it in terms of the way you guys talk and kind of have adapted to your language. I think I've adapted my thinking to that way as well. So I'm always thinking, well, how will this impact value? How will this impact?
It's very intentional. I mean, I would say that it's kind of what we teach SEPAs too. Like when I hear you say that, I think about you are actually really good at like meeting Chris and I where we are. So you understand that. Look, Scott and Chris don't understand the marketing like I would, and frankly, don't really care about some of that stuff. But they do care about building great value in their company across all three legs, across all 4 C's. So let me try to relate what I want to do to those types of things because that'll allow me to meet them where they are and really kind of join up with them a little bit in their mindset. And more so than not, it's a yes for you, right? Like that project ended up being like, oh, like thank you, like I get it now. And so I do. I think that. I think that's a really good piece of advice for somebody that has to work with business owners. And one that we talk a lot about with our SEPAs is changing the way we talk so that we can talk in the mindset or way of an owner. So I think that's a nice piece of advice for our listeners to take home.
Yeah, and I think in terms of my career and how I've grown as well, like it's challenged me to think in terms of value where sometimes I can, get a little creative and want to do something that really has no impact at all. It's just I want to do it. It's fun.
But most marketers would just go do that, though, I think.
I would agree, and I think that's helped me personally. Our team thinks in terms of value now, and when they sometimes even come to me and they have a lot of feedback of, no, we're not doing that because it has no impact on value. And I'm like, oh my gosh, who is teaching you guys? But it's fun, and I think our marketing team has a really unique perspective. So
I think that is like an impact moment. So you got to take a pause and have our listeners hear this, though, because it's like a few months ago I was in Denver at we did the 4 key observations for our Denver chapter there. And you hear this story all the time, Paige, because I utilize this story often. Because you are the only person that has ever slid a paper across my desk that said, in one of your performance reviews, that said, Scott, I don't know, this is all the X's and O's, right, that I've done this year, but this is how much value I've helped create inside of your business. So I want you guys that are listening, whether you're a SEPA or a business owner, you're seeing what I would consider 3 generations of value creation mindset. Maybe even 4 if you think about it. Chris's mindset in terms of income versus value was passed to me. I passed that to you, and now you're passing it to your whole team. I mean, you quite literally just said your whole team thinks not just this is how much leads that'll generate, this is how much fun we might have with it, this is how cool or pretty it might look. You're saying, okay, this is how much it'll put into the funnel, this is how much it'll pop out, so how much income we'll generate, but also how much value we just created inside of this company. I want everybody to listen to that. Because now imagine if you could replicate that across all people and all departments and all teams inside of your organization. So whether it's the CEO of the company or a brand new marketing intern, we're all thinking in terms of income generation and value creation, where I think today's world, most of us just think of year over year, not long-term significance. But think about the power of that. I mean, that's a pretty profound thing. I mean, I think it's what we're all after, frankly.
Yeah.
But we're doing it here at EPI.
Well, thanks. To wrap up the show here,
sure.
I kind of have one last question for you.
Sure.
So I think we have a big announcement coming up.
That we do.
Is there anything that you want to hint at for the audience?
What a loaded question. So what's funny is I've been like hinting at some of our closer members and advisors and partners. And every time I do, Paige yells at me because they're like, dude, I know you're excited, but like there's a whole marketing campaign that's around this. So I would say, yeah, please, I would say certainly stay tuned. If you follow me on LinkedIn, you've probably seen some little posts along the way. I think it is time that we take our message globally and internationally, not just to advisors, but to the business owner, and I always say the business owner community, folks that surround the business owner, advise the business owner, and that are who are the business owner themselves, that it is not enough anymore just to create a year-over-year successful company. We have to create a significant one. We have to think in terms of value and income, something Paige and I just got done discussing. And we have to align business, personal, and financial goals. So you guys all know that I love auto racing. And so you'll see us team up in 2025 with a team that will showcase that message on driving value and aligning your business, personal, and financial goals. Is that so? I'm glad that that's great. I appreciate you coming in and having very thoughtful questions. It's always kind of interesting. And as we laugh on the show sometimes, if you've seen one of these Flip the Script episodes, I don't come prepared and they don't really share their questions. So you're truly getting kind of a live look at how my brain is kind of bouncing around in these questions. But Paige, I think thanks for coming into the show, and maybe even a bigger thank you. I think everybody knows by now, but to give you another huge thanks, the show would not be what it is without you. And so I really do appreciate everything that you've done for the Exit Is Now podcast and all of our listeners. Listen, subscribe, and leave a review on all of our podcast platforms. Appreciate it, guys. See you next time.
Thank you.